Hi, my name is Kirk Hamilton, your host of the Staying Healthy Today show. This is a show where we bring you key experts in the fields of nutrition, prevention, integrative, and lifestyle medicine, or we interview key researchers and health professionals on particular topics. And today, I'm going to talk about a topic that just crossed my path, and I can't ignore it, and that's why cancer rates are increasing and in younger people. And there was a Time article on this very topic not too long ago, within the last month or so. And then I had an experience like I do every day when I had someone interested in maybe coming to the practice, and they were middle-aged male, very good health in the sense that exercised a lot, but he had just been cured, he said, of a blood cancer by getting a bone marrow transplant. And he was just wanted to do some general preventive assessment of somebody who's in their late 40s and a male. And so obviously, when I'm chatting with him on the phone to feel out some things, I asked him, have you had any COVID vaccinations? And he said, yeah, I've had three or four. And he says, but I'm cured, and kind of we stayed there a while. And then after we kept talking about other things, he said, I sat down with my very esteemed medical oncologist, and we had a conversation. And he said that he's absolutely convinced, and this is a very traditional oncologist at a major hospital system. And he said, I'm absolutely convinced that the COVID vaccines are the reason for the dramatic increase in cancers. He says, I've seen it in my practice. And he gave a number, and it was quite dramatic. And they kind of left it at that because someone like that, he's had a great result from the therapy of the bone marrow transplant, but he doesn't want to think down the line that he could still have something in his body that might bring back the cancer. And I get it. I've had cancer. and but I know how to deal with what I'm dealing with. But so that was part of it, that these articles came together. And then Dr. McCullough, Peter McCullough, the McCullough Foundation, cardiologist, epidemiologist, and internist, and he writes, and their group, the McCullough Foundation, which I highly recommend you get a subscription to their Substack of Focal Points, because they pull out the actual citation. And I get a lot of my citations from gleaning their work of medical journal articles on topics such as this. So he did a review on the increasing risk of cancer and the possibility of COVID vaccines, which many people have been thinking about. It's just no one wants to talk about it in the traditional world. And then, if you recall, within the last year, I interviewed a Dr. Abui from the Miyagi Cancer Institute in Japan, and he was a pancreatic cancer specialist, and he started noticing that his pancreatic cancer patients weren't doing as well since the era of vaccination, and they were going to death quicker and faster. And he actually correlated with the number of vaccines, three or four, I believe, and also the elevated levels of IgG antibodies, and specifically also to IgG antibodies to the spike protein, which is what's going to happen when you get a vaccine. So that interview is in print, but it's in here, and I encourage you to flip through it again. I have the original article. So all these things started coming together. So I didn't really want to go on this topic, but I had this person walk by, and then these article comes. So it made me go back and pull out some of the things that make it easier in this confusing topic to see in their graphs. And one of them was the COVID-19 vaccine and vaccines in general. And I brought the VAERS data out. That's the Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System. And you can see a graph. And in that graph from 1990, this was the government's way of looking for a signal that there was an abnormality and a risk it could be a drug, it could be a vaccine, etc. And so it started in 1990, and you can see that it's kind of very minimal all the way till 2021. And then what happened in 2021? We started giving out the vaccines, a huge spike. And then it was a little less in 22 and 23, and it tapers off as we give less and less vaccines. And it's so dramatic. If you just look at the Substack below this interview, you're going to see this. And so then this was the system that the government used to screen for a signal to be concerned about a vaccine or a drug. But because it was the COVID vaccine time frame, it just kind of got, well, it's not an accurate system, and it isn't. It's usually underreported by a factor of 30. So there was also at that time, and I'm going back in time because it'll make sense if you connect them. Um, there's the World Council for Health, and they evaluated four databases in 2022. World database, the World Health Organization's Busy Access, the U.S. Center for Disease Control, the VAERS, which I just talked about, the UDRA Vigilance, that was the European Union way of screening for drug reactions, and then the UK yellow card system. And so they compiled this report, and I have a link to that report. But at the end of that report, they conclude absolutely that the COVID-19 vaccine should be recalled. And this is in June of 2022. And yet today, still being put out there. So there's been these concerns for a very long time. And then I'll just take one article of many, and I got this from Screening Focal Points, but this is from a traditional academic institution. It says COVID vaccination and post-infection cancer signals. So signal is something that's abnormal that makes us do further investigation and evaluating patterns of potential biological mechanisms. And this was in OncoTarget in 2026. And these are by two researchers, one at Tufts University and another at Brown. So this is a traditional academic institution. And I'll just kind of read for you some of the abstract. So a systemic literature search from January 2020 to October 2025 was conducted, and a total of 69 publications were reviewed, 66 article level reports describing 333 patients across 27 countries, two retrospective population level investigations of 300,000 from Italy, 8.4 million from South Korea, qualified cancer incidence and mortality trends among vaccinated populations, and one longitudinal analysis of 1.3 million US military members spanning the pre-pandemic through the post-pandemic periods. And what they came out with is they reviewed these types of way of investigation. It says across reports, several recurrent themes emerged. One, unusually rapid progression, recurrence, and reactivation of pre-existing indolent or controlled disease. Two, atypical or localized histopathological findings, including involvement of vaccine injection sites or regional lymph nodes. And three, proposed immunologic links between acute infection or vaccination and tumor dormancy, immune escape, or microenvironmental shifts. Says these findings underscore the need for rigorous epidemiologic, longitudinal, clinical, histopathological, forensic, and mechanistic studies to assess whether or under what conditions the COVID vaccination or infection may be linked with cancer. So that's from a very traditional setting. It's hard to write about these things. I mean, there aren't things that people are supported in writing in an academic institution or even any institution. We take back the example that I gave you at the very beginning. The oncologist has seen obviously an increased risk, a significant increased risk during the vaccination period, and he's sure of it, but he can't talk about it. So, not to belabor the point, but as a preventive medicine person, you get into medicine to help people stay well. At least I did. And so you do that by diet and lifestyle. And when people go, when you want to give nutrients instead of drugs, when you can, but you give drugs, but you try and keep people well. So we can talk about the newest vitamin for this or the newest drug for that. But the truth is, if we're doing something to people on a massive scale, remember 5.5 billion people were injected with an experimental gene therapy. Prevention is the best. And now the horse is already out of the barn. And so there's one other graph that if you go underneath this interview, it said reported deaths from major drug vaccine recalls. And this was VAERS data. And so back in 1955, polio vaccine, there was an incident there and they had 10 deaths. And so they recalled it. And that was in less than a year. Swine flu vaccine, 1976, 53 deaths. They recalled it. And they go down the list of different things, like, for example, diethylstilbestrol. And that was around for 37 years. 213 people died, and they recalled it. Vioxx, it was around for 5 years and then eventually recalled. And you see the number of deaths that occur on the graph. And then all of a sudden, the COVID-19 vaccine 1 year into 2022, and the graph goes just way to the right. The number of deaths, potentially 28,000, and no recall. It's so obvious. These are more than gut signals. So look at those two graphs if you do nothing else. Okay. And my thing is choice. We should have freedom of choice. And if we don't want to put things in our body, we should. And then, so that kept me going down the vaccine rabbit hole, kind of backwards, trying to pull all kinds of vaccines together. And then we got into the basic vaccines. And then I've written about Dale Bigtree's excellent documentary called An Inconvenient Study, and it kind of drugged me back there, so to speak. But that is a review of the trial at Henry Ford Health System of 18,000 people. Approximately, I think 6,000 were unvaccinated compared to 12,000 those who were vaccinated over, and I believe it was from 0 to 18 years of age. And there was a dramatic difference found in the health problems in the vaccinated versus the unvaccinated. And a Dr. Zerbos was supposed to publish that study, and then he changed his mind and he wouldn't do it. So Dale Bigtree had to go in and had a little camera somewhere on his clothing, and he filmed them talking about the study, and Dr. Zerbos said it was a fine study, and it was accurate, but he wouldn't publish it for a variety of reasons at that institution when he said he would do it no matter what beforehand. And then to be fair, I put in the fact checking from the Henry Ford Health System on the documentary, but I would highly read that. So I personally can't think of a situation in my life where I'd take another vaccine, and I wouldn't recommend it to my family members and people I care about. So that's that. That's the vaccine issue. Kind of, it took a life of its own just on the, why are there increasing cancers in younger people in Time Magazine kind of led me down the rabbit hole. But it's hard to explain a very complicated topic in a short amount of time and do it well with all the perfect citations. So I have the links there. So everything is documented. You can go through and click on the links in the Substack, which is linked to this video. All right. So then some of the other happier notes. I've had a couple of patients come back. I interviewed a Dr. John Lewis on his allopurinol dietary supplement, and he did a study on Alzheimer's disease and multiple sclerosis. And he was just interviewed also by Dr. Peter McCullough. So I put a link to that interview because it's very good. And I've had two patients, totally anecdotal. They're on the 4 scoops a day, which is 10 grams of the polymanol supplement, and 2 of them in their late 70s. Well, and I take that back. One is the late 70s and one is in their late 50s. And both of them immediately noted clarity of thinking. I didn't really have to bring it up, and they'd only been on it a week. So I'm going to do a little study, but I think it's a worthwhile product if you have someone with cognitive issues. I'm taking it myself. Try it and do it for 3 months. And if you can get the 4 scoops a day down, it's very easy to take. It doesn't taste bad. Try it and give me feedback. I'd greatly appreciate it. So there's another article linked to brewed coffee and its compounds act through a very sophisticated pathway. But again, we come up with the fact that coffee is good for anti-aging, cognition. But I would caution one thing. I can just say for myself, I can have a small amount of coffee, do okay, and people would laugh, but maybe half a cup, quarter cup. But if I had a cup or 2 of coffee every day, that would give. And I didn't know what I do now. I get an esophageal spasm that's like a heart attack type pain. I know what it is. I get cramping at night. It increases urination. Muscle cramps increases urination. And sometimes I can get headaches if, let's say, I had 2 cups because I was driving a long way and I had to stay awake. So what I'm trying to say is there's definitely biological benefits to coffee, but you have to listen to you, the individual. In my case, I know what it does. I have to control it. If you didn't know that, I would have had to go. I could have gone to a gastroenterologist specialist to look down and scope why I get these spasms. I would have to go maybe to a cardiologist to see why I had the chest pain. Um, I'd have to maybe take a medicine for older people like myself to control urination at night. I mean, and then muscle cramps, who knows what drug, so you need to be aware that caffeine can be very powerful and cause negative effects. So while everybody likes to promote coffee, and I do myself, and I like my small cup of coffee a day, you got to pay attention to your body. There's a great thing I put in there that I took myself. My weak area in my lifestyle is my sleep. Okay, so I do this and I stay up late and I work, and so that's the challenge for me to get adequate sleep. But this was from the American Heart Association. They have a little test, and so they have an eat better test, an activity eat better question. Excuse me. They have a diet question, an activity question, smoking, sleep, manage weight, control cholesterol, uh, control blood sugar, and control blood pressure. So I scored 80 out of the 100, which is was good health, but I could do better, and I think sleep would bring that score up. But it was kind of interesting. You can see the link there, and you can take the test yourself. Um, the other was so hard text related to methamphetamines. Well, people might say, well, who cares about that? Well, 1 in 6 heart attacks study in California. So methamphetamines use linked to 1 in 6 heart attacks in California study. People who suffered meth-related heart attacks were often young to middle-aged men without traditional heart disease risk factors. So obviously, methamphetamines aren't good for you. But interestingly enough, in that article, it says it's from the American Heart Association. It's on their cannabis statement. It says, as with cannabis, methamphetamines is becoming a major risk factor for developing heart disease in young adults. So I think everybody might see the relationship between methamphetamines, but cannabis, we've kind of swept that under the carpet as it's okay. And I am from the camp, I don't like putting any drugs on my body. And I know that the marijuana these days is much stronger than people have told me that really smoke or use marijuana for over many years. The stuff today is much more potent than it was way back 30, 40 years ago, or even 50 years ago. And then so that's one issue, that cannabis might even increase the risk to vascular disease. But the second part is now we're going to go to the geopolitical. Why do I talk about geopolitical stuff? Because again, this affects our health. Michael Yon, who's a Special Forces Green Beret, world-renowned combat correspondent, goes all over the world talking about mass migration and what's how different world governments, whatever you want to call it, are shaping the world. And one of the things is he believes strongly that you try and dumb down a nation. And so when you see more of um, the marijuana stores coming up, that's actually a kind of a biowarfare. And he brings up cases of in Thailand where he's traveled extensively. They're starting to pop up all over the place. We have them in the United States. He talks about Argentina and other countries as a weapon of war, of a different type of warfare. Just think about it. We're not a healthier nation. I would say we're very susceptible to being overrun, so to speak. Then we get into some lighter things. A plant-based diet helps lower C-reactive protein, which is a general marker of inflammation. The microplastics, when you have that cup of coffee and that hot coffee goes into even the paper cup, well, the inner plastic lining can degrade, and you can get more microplastics that way. Then one of my favorite topics is beans, because beans are in every longevity culture, and there's this article on chickpeas, a nutrient-dense food that feeds gut bacteria and improves digestive function, high in iron, protein, And so that's a very good article, and there's about 5 or 6 reference articles about that. Brain health and vitamin D. So what they did, there was a study at age 39, vitamin D levels could predict brain changes 16 years later by different specific types of PET scans. So vitamin D levels, I like, and many of the people in my field keep the levels between 50 and 75. Um, the deficiency level is at around 30. That's what traditional medical people will have you try and get. But I like my people taking between 5,000 and 10,000 with 100, 200 micrograms of vitamin K as well. So there's a thing on stress. We all get stressed out, and it's because there's too much clutter around. And it made me think back um, I was trying to remember this Japanese female, and her name was Marie Kondo. And it was a simple book, The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up. And I remember reading the book, and my biggest thing of clutter is I have papers around because I keep thinking I'm going to read it and I can't get to it. Clothes I do really well with, other things I do real well with, but my Achilles heel is papers and projects because I want to read that and I think I can get to it and I can't get to it. But that book was one of the most excellent books I've ever read, and simple. And I may read it again and actually try and practice some of the things she does. Marie Kondo, excellent book, The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up. An article on increased risk of cancers that are occurring, a frequency in the appendix, of all things. And then my normal links to ivermectin and mebendazole and fenbendazole case studies of cancer being helped. And that comes from Dr. Makis's work. Um, and then we're almost done here. And then I wanted to close with 2 things. And there's other things in this newsletter. I'm just kind of taking the highlights that stimulate me. But Michael Young, the gentleman I talked to you about, was interviewed by an individual from New Zealand on kind of the world view of what's happening. So we all have heard the Strait of Hormuz. If it gets blocked or stays blocked, it could cause an economic crisis. Fertilizer can't come through, fuel can't come through. But if fertilizer can't come through, then the world is going to have some famine. And Michael Yon goes through all these different choke points in the world, from the Panama Canal. In Germany, there's certain choke points, waterways, all over the world. And he gives kind of a prediction. But the whole thing of mass migration, well, first, if you have, let's say, the Strait of Hormuz blocked off, you're going to have less flow of product, of energy. And if you don't have energy and you don't have fertilizer, certain countries are going to start having famines quicker than others, i.e., some of the Asian populations, like in Thailand and around the world. And so what happens is then you have more pressure from people moving from areas, and that osmotic pressure is a type of warfare, and it may be, and people like Michael think it's very planned. And so when you have mass population transfers into other countries, it's just the prescription for cultural clashes and things that are happening right now. So he did this excellent interview with someone from New Zealand who is considered a Western culture country, but started off with what was happening during COVID and the severe lockdowns and severe restriction of human rights and civil rights there. But this whole concept of uh, famine is coming. It's sobering, but it's something that's going to happen, especially if these choke points, these different water routes, are closed off or blocked for a while. And is it intentional? The $1 million question, I think it is. And you'll see Michael Jan really thinks it is. And so it's a very worthwhile interview to listen to. And I put a link to that, and I actually summarized the transcript with his permission. And then lastly, um, you know, we have data centers, and there's this one story of farmers who didn't want to give in and sell their area for $26 million. And so we have that question of data centers. We have that question of farmers. We have shrinking farming uh, land and a number of farmers. And is that intentional? Is that intentional to create um, famine? Is it intentional to create a dependency on other sources of government? And then we had World Falun Dafa Day yesterday, and the Falun Dafa are very dear to my heart. They are a group it was a Buddhist tradition started in the late 1980s and blossomed during the 1990s in China, where they did a type of qigong, tai chi looking um, exercise with some meditation, and anyway, grew to 100 million people in China. And then the Chinese Communist Party decided to say, hey, that's threatening us. And so they persecute them. And not only do they throw them in jail, but they are used for live organ harvesting for a huge billion-dollar transplant industry in China. And it's hard to believe. So they had their annual day, May 13th, the World Falun Dafa Day, and they're a peaceful group. Um, and I'm actually going to interview a book author, Killed to Order, Jan Jekielek, in a couple of weeks on this very topic. But to me, they're the most Gandhi-like people that I know, and they're wonderful people, and they should be free to practice what they want, but they can't, and not get persecuted for it. So, on that note, I'll end today, and remember the links to all the articles and what I talk about are below. And I hope you have a good day, and I'll talk to you soon.